With Remembrance Day upon us, today is National Indigenous Veterans Day, and Canadians took to social media to share stories and participate in ceremonies nationwide. But in the prairies, the Day of Honor was actually not recognized until 1994. Jason Gaidola joining us live from the newsroom with more on this. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Matt. Many within the First Nations communities want to see this day commemorated in a much bigger way, simply for the fact that more than 7,000 Indigenous members served for 2 world wars and the Korean War.
From commemorations in the East Coast and moments of silence at cenotaphs across the country, Canadians are remembering those of First Nations who served overseas while fighting their own battle on home soil.
Thank you for your commitment, service and sacrifice. Lest we forget, n'oublions jamais. Mekwida now nej.
With Remembrance Day upon us, November 8th is National Indigenous Veterans Day, the commemoration of the thousands who served during the 2 world wars and the Korean War.
Personally, I remember my grandfather who served in the First World War, and uncles and my father who served at the end of the Second World War. As a Métis person, we are just an emerging people because we were hidden for many years. So it's a very proud thing to bring our heritage forward.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a statement today to honor the 200 years of First Nations service, adding Indigenous peoples have historically faced unique challenges, from having to travel far from their communities to enlist, to overcoming language barriers and adapting to cultural differences while in service in Canada. Despite this, they demonstrated great courage to overcome these challenges on the front lines and as skilled sharpshooters and trackers.
Discriminatory practices often made it difficult for Indigenous people to enlist and to serve their country.
The Day of Memorial was created in 1994 after Indigenous veterans were not recognized in Remembrance Day activities in years past.
That Indigenous people were not treated the same after they returned home. They were not given the same supports, unfortunately. So things like veterans benefits, so land grants, pensions, things like that, many Indigenous veterans were denied those supports when they returned home.
Across social media, posts today included a special poppy made by a Cree Métis artist to stories about relatives.
My great-grandfather came back from the war, and there weren't a lot of supports in terms of mental health, financial support, and he really suffered. So that's one thing that I think people should understand, is that they went over with this very selfless, supreme sacrifice for their communities, but also for their country.
Indigenous Studies professor with Conestoga College, Robin Michaud, says much was on the line for First Nations people who enlisted.
A lot of rights that were taken away from Indigenous people because of the Indian Act. So enfranchisement was a way of getting people to sign away their status in order to get those rights. I've also been told that Indigenous soldiers, a lot of them enlisted because they knew that if Canada were to lose in the war effort, the treaties would be null and void. So they volunteered their service in order to protect the treaties. So in service of their own communities, they wanted to serve to make sure that those treaties stayed in place.
And according to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, there are 2,700 Indigenous service members currently in the Canadian Armed Forces.